Have you ever reached out a hand to save someone in a sandstorm, only for them to return later, not to repay the favor, but to ask you to expose the person hiding a knife behind their back? Wind tore through Coyote Gulch like an old sleepless beast, slashing strips of hot sand across bare skin. On a narrow trail stretched across the canyon wall, a man led a gray horse, moving slow and steady. Behind the saddle, a 7-year-old girl clung to a blanket, coughing in short, grainy bursts as if tiny pebbles were caught in her throat. The smell of dry leather, salt-tinged sweat, and scorched dust clung to them, heavy as an unspoken oath. Below the shallow cliff edge, metal scraped against rock. A wagon lay tipped on its side, one wheel wedged deep in a rut, straps pulled tight like a bowstring on the verge of snapping. And there, amid the sliding sheet of sand, a broad-shouldered woman hung on to a leather strap, breathing hard but eyes blazing, never looking away from the trapped horse. One hand offered could save them. One turned back, and the sand would erase every footprint. The man stopped, lifted a damp cloth over the girl's nose, tightened the saddle straps. He didn't ask a name. He simply went down. And he had no idea that saving her from a storm would lead to another kind of wind entirely. The wind of truth, of trust, and of a deal struck between people who still believe in walking straight. Coyote Gulch sat on the far edge of the West, where maps fade to smudges and wind is the only thing that never stops moving. That year's dry season was harsher than most. Grass burned down to the roots. The earth cracked like old scars. Even the raspy croak of frogs in the stone pockets had gone quiet long ago. People said, if you can survive one dry season in Coyote Gulch, you'll never fear any place again. Elias Crow didn't believe that. He only knew he had to survive this season because of June, the 7-year-old he found 3 years ago inside a burned freight car in the Santa Fe desert. Back then, she lay among charred wood, barely breathing. Elias had no reason to take her. His heart simply wouldn't let him walk away. Since then, June became the tiny light inside his ragged tent, the reason a man called Crow still lived like someone trying to protect the sun. That morning, Elias was riding back from dry wells after 3 days shoeing horses for a transport team. In the saddlebag behind him lay the last of their supplies, a cornbread loaf and a small bundle of cough medicine, bought with the final few coins he had. June had coughed all night, but insisted on going with him at sunrise. "Daddy, I'm going to draw that pass," she said, voice hoarse but eyes bright as black glass. "Draw what on the pass?" "The wind. It looks like a long snake." Elias chuckled softly, a rare sound, like rain in this country. "If you can draw the wind," he said, "you're better than me." Elias Crow was somewhere in his 30s, broad-shouldered, skin weathered brown, hands tough as rope. Every movement was deliberate, economical, as if he rationed his breaths the same way he rationed food. On horseback, his posture stayed straight, eyes scanning the horizon. He wasn't rich, not poor either. Just a man trying to stay honest in a place where hunger bent people into shapes they never expected. As they headed south, he passed St. Mercy Station, a small roadside chapel watched over by Sister Abigail. She used to be a battlefield nurse, then left everything behind to shelter travelers and lost children. Seeing the two of them stop, she came out holding a pot of peppermint tea. "The weather's cruel lately, Elias," she rasped, voice warm despite the grit. "Cruel is normal, sister. Strange thing is people still stay. Staying is a kind of faith, even when we don't know what we're believing in." She looked at June, brushed her hair from her eyes, and sighed. That child needs warmth for a few days. The wind's about to change. Elias nodded, though his gaze was already locked on the mountain pass. He knew if he stayed, they wouldn't have enough money for food next month. I'll stop by again when I have reason to pass through, but I need to keep moving. Sister Abigail watched him go, knowing he didn't lie. At midday, the Raven Switch Pass appeared like a thin tear across the mountains. Hot wind screamed through the gap, twisting red sand into coils. Far ahead, a freight convoy crawled up the incline. Canvas-covered wagons bore a large letter S, the mark of Sinclair Range and Freight, a new transport line connecting Silver Ridge to the southern border. At the head rode a chestnut mare carrying a broad-shouldered woman, solid as quarried stone. Her leather coat pulled tight across her frame, wild gray strands whipping at her temples. Verity Sinclair, owner of the freight company. Wealthy, unbending as sandstone. She didn't just run wagons. She owned cattle depots, cold stock houses, and two of the biggest supply sheds this side of the territory. Men used to swear no woman could run an operation like that. Then Verity did. She spoke little, walked slow but steady. One glance from her could quiet a team of rowdy drivers. Beside her rode Harlan Pike, her newest manager, shirt still spotless in the blowing dust. His smile was thin and polished like a sharpened blade. Harlan praised Verity constantly, but the brightest thing in his eyes was ambition. As the convoy climbed, the sky darkened. The wind truly shifted, coming hard from the southwest, carrying sand like waves. The lead horses shrieked, flicking their tails like whips. Verity pulled on the reins and shouted, "Stop moving! Cover the wagons! Tighten the straps!" But the wind tore her voice apart. The second wagon tilted. One wheel lodged deep into a rut. A horse jerked loose, dragging the whole wagon toward the cliff edge. "Leave it!" Harlan shouted. "Save the people first!" Verity didn't let go. "Oh, that wagon carries medicine for the border hospital! I'm not leaving it!" A driver tried helping but got thrown by the wind. Sand rose thick as smoke. Half a mile away, Elias heard metal screeching, horses crying out. He stopped, looking down the ravine. Brown-red sand churned like blood beneath fading sunlight. June tugged on his sleeve. "Daddy, someone's down there." He nodded. "Yeah. Cover your face. Don't open your eyes." He secured the blankets around her, set her hands on the saddle horn, then slid down the slope, each step sinking into loose sand. Every grain stung his eyes, but he kept going. He asked no questions, calculated nothing. Below, Verity still gripped the leather strap, shoulders trembling from the strain. When Elias grabbed the rope beside her, she looked up, startled. "Let it go! You can't pull that thing!" "I'm not letting go." His voice was rough, short, certain. He tied the strap around his waist and signaled the remaining workers. Wind hammered them. Sand swallowed their boots. The horse screamed. Verity slipped a foot and slid, and Elias caught her wrist. She was heavy like a burning boulder, but her eyes, they held no fear, only will. 3 men pulled. The rope groaned, the wagon lurched, snap, the wheel popped free from the rut. The horse spilled onto solid ground. The workers collapsed. Verity fell against Elias, sweat and sand warm on his shoulder. He asked, "Anyone else down there?" The driver, maybe dead. Elias went again, climbed down, searched. Carried the man's body back up. When he returned, Verity sat against a wheel, face flushed from heat, her round cheeks glowing like hot copper. She stared up at him. "You want payment?" "No." "Why?" "Because you're still breathing." Verity studied him, uncertain whether to argue or understand. But the wind rose again, covering both of them in sand. Hours later, when the storm eased, they made it to St. Mercy. Sister Abigail welcomed them into the cool stone room, set Verity on a bench, and poured peppermint tea. June sat in the corner drawing a horse with ropes tied around its belly, eyes wide with focus. Sister Abigail shook her head gently. "None this world keeps a little goodness alive because of people who don't ask for anything back." Elias didn't reply. He just sat there patching a torn leather strap, eyes fixed on the pass outside. The sand was still moving, but inside that room there was a different kind of warmth. The warmth that comes when someone steps across the thin line between life and death, and someone else reaches out without needing to know a name. The wind howled like a funeral trumpet for the land itself. Sandstorms in Coyote Gulch didn't fall from the sky like rain. His boots sank deep, scraping against the grit like burning coal. Above him, Verity Sinclair still gripped the rope tied around the horse, her broad body leaning dangerously toward the drop. Her coat was torn at the shoulder. Sweat darkened her back. Sand clung to her cheeks, turning her face the color of heated iron, but her eyes were still sharp. "Ya watch it, stranger!" she shouted, her voice cracking in the storm. "The wagon is about to slip." Elias didn't answer. He looped a leather strap around his waist, tied it to the axle, then motioned to the two remaining freight hands. "Pull on his signal." The rope tightened, screeching like a bent horn. The horse thrashed, belly heaving, whites of its eyes showing. A sharp crack, and the wheel jerked free. Elias lurched backward, knees hitting the ground, sand slashing his face. He gritted his teeth and held the line. Verity lost her footing, her whole weight tipping toward the ravine. For an instant, Elias saw her eyes wide open, fear mixed with fury, the fury of someone who refuses to die. He surged forward and grabbed her wrist. Her wrist was thick, warm, heavy, pulse racing. He pulled with everything he had. The wind screamed. The leather cut into his palms until blood beaded along the edge, and then they collapsed onto the dry earth together. They lay there gasping. Sand still whipped around them, the horse still crying out somewhere in the haze. Elias pushed himself up and helped Verity sit. She panted hard, chest heaving, solid frame trembling under the weight of adrenaline, then let out a rough laugh. For a second I thought, I was done. "You're alive," Elias said simply. She spotted the driver sprawled yards away. She made to crawl toward him, but Elias pressed a steady hand on her shoulder. "I'll go." He moved toward the body, hauled it up from the rocks, then gently closed the man's eyes. Verity watched, her expression softening in a way she didn't expect. No one had taught her to look at death with that kind of quiet respect. When the storm eased, the sky remained a sickly yellow like burnt hide stretched over the world. Elias gathered the horses, tied them into a line, then turned to Verity. "Can you walk?" "Probably," she rasped. "I'm heavy." He nodded once, said nothing, and slipped an arm under hers. They walked slowly, steadying each other. Sand dragged at their feet, leaving two deep tracks. One large, one small. Up on the ridge, June stood beside the ash-gray horse, squinting through the sand, her tiny hand covering half her face. When she saw her father, she cried out over the wind. "Daddy, are you okay?" "All good," Elias called back, gesturing with his free hand. "Hold the reins." June tied the rope to a rock outcrop, her hands trembling but sure. When Elias and Verity reached her, the girl hesitated, then held out a damp cloth she'd kept ready in her fist. "For your face. The sand is everywhere." Verity let out a cracked laugh and took it. Her hand was big, calloused, but when she touched the cloth, her movement was strangely gentle. "Thank you, little one." They led the surviving horses back to St. Mercy. Sand coated them so thickly that Verity's clothing weighed twice what it should. At the threshold, she dropped heavily onto the stone step, breathing like bellows. A button popped loose on her coat, her skin flushed from heat and exhaustion. Sister Abigail hurried to her side. "You're overheated. Inside. Now." Verity shook her head. "I'm fine. Help someone else." Elias set a water flask on the table, poured into a wooden cup, and offered it to her. When the water touched her lips, Verity drank in large gulps, water spilling down her chin and neck. She exhaled hard, half laughing. "No one has ever hauled me like that, Crow. I only pull people who are falling." Sister Abigail watched them, a small smile lifting the corner of her mouth. "Some people exist so the world won't forget kindness." Verity looked at Elias, eyes lowering. "You know you could have died." "I know, but I lived." She swallowed hard, voice rough but steady. "When I owe you my life." "No one owes anything," Elias replied. "We just crossed paths when we needed to." Later, the room glowed gold from the setting light. June sat on a stool, sketching the scene. Swirling sand, a terrified horse, and a big woman bracing her feet to stand. She shaded the drawing, then held it up for Verity. "This is you?" "Yeah," Verity wheezed, grinning. I look bigger on paper. I don't know how to draw small people." A laugh escaped, light as the breeze after rain. Elias sat near the window, eyes on the ridge, fingers wrapped around a cup of water. He knew tomorrow the road would still be long, the sand still cruel, and life still stubborn. But tonight, in a small stone station warmed by the breath of 3 people, he felt something shift, as if the wind had changed direction and kindness still had soil to take root. That night, Verity sat alone in the back room. She opened her ledger and wrote unevenly, the ink breaking from her uneven breath. "That man didn't ask who I was. He saved me as a person, not as a name." She paused, looking out the window where Elias slept on the porch, one arm behind his head, June curled beside him. Firelight traced the lines of his face like time carving stone. A strange thought crossed her mind. If kindness had a shape, it would look like that man. At dawn, the storm had vanished, leaving a golden sheet of sand. Verity prepared to ride. Elias was already awake, checking the horses. She approached, still stiff, voice low. "At least let me pay you." "No, you're poor." "Yes, but I don't sell favors." The answer stunned her. Something flickered in her eyes. Respect, maybe shame. "I won't forget." "People are busy, Sinclair," Elias said, tugging the reins. "Go your way." She wanted to say more but didn't. When the convoy disappeared over the ridge, June asked softly, "Daddy, will she come back?" "I don't know," Elias answered, voice fading into the wind. "But if she keeps her word, the sand will tell us." And then the wind rose again, swirling like it was keeping the promise for them. The sky brightened after the storm as if God had just dried his eyes. Sand still hung in the air, glittering like gold dust. Through the stone window of St. Mercy, Light filtered past an old curtain and fell in a slanted band across the red tile floor where Verity Sinclair lay quiet, wrapped in a thick blanket that smelled of dried mint. Sister Abigail sat beside her, a lean hand roughened by years of field dressing. She touched Verity's brow as if reading a prayer. "Coming down," she murmured. "Big body, soft heart. Maybe years of bracing yourself did it?" Elias sat a few steps away, his hands still seeping where the leather line had cut them. He said nothing, only held them over a small flame, letting the blood set, letting the faint scorch drift into the room. June was next to him with paper and charcoal, sketching her father hauling the rope. In the drawing, he was 1/10 the size of the heavy woman tipping toward the ravine. The child added a few tiny strokes, then tilted her head. "Daddy, she looks like a hill," June said, voice clear as a drop of water. "Yeah," Elias chuckled softly, "but that hill broke the wind for you." Verity blinked awake and looked around. Everything here was plain in a way that felt strange. Stone walls, a rough table, an open window, the smell of roots and leaves, and the faint hiss of wind outside. She had slept in rooms bright with electric light, with hired hands to change her clothes, yet no place had felt as peaceful as this. She tried to sit up, but Sister Abigail kept a palm on her shoulder. "Don't rush it. You're dry as bone. I have business to finish. If you die on the road, that business won't mean a thing." Verity studied the nun's dark, honest eyes, clear as two small panes of glass. She gave a rasping laugh. "I'm not used to taking orders." "Then consider that God is borrowing my mouth." Elias turned, his voice rough and low. "You should rest. The wind is still strong out there." Verity nodded, then looked him over. The man wasn't especially tall, but his shoulders were broad, his skin weathered, his gaze steady. Something about him troubled her, not from contempt, but because he wanted nothing from her. In Verity's world, everyone wanted something, a contract, a favor, a cut of the profit. This man who had dragged her from the edge hadn't asked her name, much less mentioned money. "Crow, what's your trade?" she asked. "Shoe horses, fix wagons, mend what's broken if it's still worth the trouble. And if it isn't, then you bury it." Sister Abigail smiled, tugging the blanket higher. "He's not much for words, but he's good at living." Verity regarded Elias, then dipped her chin. "I see that." By noon, June set a bowl of barley soup and a few slices of cornbread on the stand by Verity's bed. "You should eat before it goes cold." Verity looked at the child. A smile tugged at her cracked lips. "What's your name?" "June, like the month." "Daddy says I was born in the hottest month." "June," Verity repeated, tasting the word she hadn't said in years. "Your father chose well. He says sunlight that doesn't scorch is hope, but I still get hot." "That's good. Means you're alive." June smiled and stirred the soup. Light spilled over her hair, shining like an oat field in summer. Toward evening, Verity stepped onto the porch. The wind was gentler, the smell of post-storm earth sharp and clean. Elias was mending a saddle, hands sure, movements measured. She watched him for a spell, then said, "Do you know who I am?" "Don't need to. If you did, you might ask for more than a thank you." "Whatever I ask won't buy me that sky, Miss Sinclair." Verity turned away with a short laugh. "Men like you are rare. Rare folks have a hard time living." Silence settled in. Only the tick of the fire and the whisper of wind through stone remained. Night fell, and when Sister Abigail finally slept, Verity stayed awake. She sat by the window, looking out at Elias on watch under the oil lamp's glow. June slept in the crook of his arm, clutching her drawing pad. The sight ached in Verity's chest. Not pity, envy for a peace she hadn't felt in years. She remembered nights in Silver Ridge when the tally of her foreman clattered on in her head long after she lay down. She had thought herself strong. Here in this little stone house, she felt only like a tired woman in a coat of authority. "Crow," she called softly. Elias looked over, his eyes quiet. "You're not sleeping?" "Can't. I keep hearing that wind from yesterday. I thought it would bury me." "Wind buries the scared. It spares the ones who hang on." "You figure I hung on?" "You're still looking at daylight, so you hung on." Verity let a rough laugh slip. It drifted into the dark, low, and out of place. "You remind me of my father. He said something close to that. He died on the freight road. The wind buried him. Maybe the wind carried him where he needed to go." They were quiet a while. Then she said, voice tightened by feeling, "You saved me, and I don't know what to do with a debt like that." "No debts. Sand covers tracks. People cover memories. We just pass through each other's lives." She held his gaze for a long moment. Her eyes weren't those of a company boss now, but of a woman who had brushed up against something true. "If I needed a man like you someday, do you think I could find you?" Easier to trust the wind than a promise. She nodded with a husky laugh. "Then let the wind remember for us." At dawn, Elias was saddling up. Verity stood on the threshold. Sunlight struck her, gilding her broad frame until she looked like a bronze statue set in sand. "Thank you," she said, voice low and warm. "If we meet again, I hope it's for a decent reason." "All roads empty into the desert, Miss Sinclair." She smiled, turned her horse, and rode. Dust rose around the hooves and folded into a sky returning to blue. In the stone cabin, June watched her go and whispered, "Daddy, will she remember what she promised the wind?" Elias smoothed a hand over the child's hair. "The wind goes far, but it knows the way back. We just have to wait." Somewhere out in that country of weather and grit, Verity Sinclair tightened her reins and felt her heart beating strong again. Not from fear. For the first time in years, she believed in someone besides herself. That morning, sunlight poured over St. Mercy like honey over stone. No wind, just the slow clack of hooves and the scent of dry grass rising from the yard. The whole land felt as if it had finally woken from a fever of sand and storm. Verity Sinclair stood on the steps, broad shoulders framed inside a moss-colored leather coat. Her hair was tied back, a few gray strands blown loose across her forehead. She had swapped yesterday's storm-beaten clothes for a travel vest, still worn but sharply pressed. The powerful woman looked composed, though her eyes held an unfamiliar hesitation. Elias Crow led his horse out. The saddle had been repaired, the leather strap that snapped during the storm now stitched with a neat black knot. June followed a few steps behind, arms wrapped around her drawing pad, fingers still smudged with charcoal. She watched the large woman with a mix of curiosity and quiet fondness. Verity gave Elias a small nod. "Thank you for pulling me out of death and for pulling my faith back with it. You can name a price." Elias shook his head, voice dry as dust. "There is no price. I'm not used to owing anyone, Mr. Crow." "Then let the wind pay it." Verity stared at him, lips pressing together. She might have been feared across half the territory, but no one had ever refused her like that. She pulled a folded bank draft from her vest and held it out. "Take it. This isn't a favor. It's payment for those hands you tore up." Elias didn't move. "My hands tore because of the wind, not because of you." There was no bite in his tone, only truth. Truth from a man who didn't bend. Verity inhaled sharply, then tucked the paper back inside her coat. "You are the first stranger who ever made me feel small." "You're not small," Elias said, squinting toward the horizon. "I reckon even a storm has to move aside for you." She let out a rough laugh, then fell quiet. A soft breeze stirred again, lifting the loose strands of hair around her face. "I won't forget this," she said, voice lower. "People are busy, Miss Sinclair," Elias replied. "Go on your way." When she finally turned her horse, Verity's broad silhouette grew smaller and smaller against the sheets of gold sand. Hooves kicked up spirals of dust that trailed behind her like handwriting left by the wind. June narrowed her eyes, watching. "She looks like a mountain that learned how to walk." Elias smiled. Even mountains return to the wind someday. Out there, somewhere across the open dunes, Verity eased her reins and whispered to herself, "If the wind remembers, I will come back." The desert swallowed the words, but St. Mercy kept the echo, a promise that cost nothing, yet meant everything. 3 weeks after the storm, Coyote Gulch returned to its usual shape, dry, briny, and silent. The wind no longer screamed, but it still whispered along the rock ridges, as if retelling a story the sand hadn't finished remembering. North of the pass, Elias Crow had slipped back into the rhythm of ordinary days, shoeing horses, fixing wagon axles, trading bags of oats for a little salt. His small timber shack sat beneath a lone pine, the only shade for miles in a world cracked open by heat. Every morning, he rose early, brewed a weak pot of coffee, shared half with June, the little girl sitting quietly on the doorstep, drawing the sun on scrap wood with charcoal. "Dad?" June asked, voice soft as a falling grain of sand. "Do you think she remembers you?" "Who?" Elias answered, pretending he didn't know. "The lady from the pass, the big one, the one who talks like thunder." Elias gave a short laugh and rested the cup on his knee. "Sand travels far, June, but it doesn't often find its way back." June didn't reply. She only added another round circle to her drawing. The sun, or maybe the eyes of Verity Sinclair as she remembered them. Every noon, Sister Abigail walked over from St. Mercy carrying dry biscuits and cough drops. She looked at the old tear on Elias's hand and shook her head. "You save people, but you never save yourself." "I'm still breathing. That's enough." "No one survives on breath alone, Elias." He didn't argue. He only stared toward the pass. On Raven Switch Ridge, thin columns of smoke sometimes rose. Maybe a freight convoy, maybe someone burning trash. The wind bent the smoke sideways, and sometimes it carried what sounded like distant hoofbeats. At night, when the wind turned cold, June bundled herself in an old quilt and waited for a story. Elias spoke less these days. Silence filled more space between words. "Do you think wind has a memory?" June asked. Elias smiled, eyes fixed on the firelight. "If it does, it remembers the ones who never asked for a name." In town, rumors traveled faster than wagons. People at the Dry Wells Saloon swore freight from Sinclair Range had been stolen on the pass. Some claimed it was bandits staging a trap. Others said someone inside the company helped it happen. The name Harlan Pike came up often, always accompanied by the smirk of a man who believed he'd already won. Elias listened, But he didn't belong to the world of men with ledgers and ambitions. Yet some nights, when June slept, he still thought of Verity. The hardness in her voice, the sadness behind her strength. He remembered her ragged breathing in the storm, and her words, "I won't forget." He told himself he didn't believe in promises, but sometimes, when he stepped outside, he found himself staring south toward the ridge where moonlight traced a silver line and wondering if wind could carry someone's words back across a desert. One evening, Elias hammered the last shoe onto a chestnut mare and sat beside the doorway, heat burning off the earth. Overhead, a flock of crows wheeled in a slow spiral, their harsh calls echoing like a warning. June pointed upward. "Dad, the crows are circling. Does that mean rain?" "No, sometimes it means news is coming." He said it casually, but his eyes were fixed on the horizon, as if he sensed something moving through the wind, crossing dunes, crossing distance, carrying a promise he refused to name. And then, on that horizon, a black dot appeared. A rider, a duster coat, a wide brim hat, a leather satchel slung across the back. As the sun caught the seal on the envelope in his hand, the red wax shimmered like dried blood. The letter bore a single stamped letter, S. A breath of wind stirred the tin roof and carried the scent of metal and dust. Elias lifted his head. The wind had remembered. That afternoon, sunlight poured over Coyote Gulch like thick honey, spreading gold across the cracked earth. Elias Crow was slipping out of his leather apron, wiping sweat from his brow, when hoofbeats echoed in the distance. The rhythm was steady, not rushed, not afraid. It was the sound of someone who knew exactly where they were going and had no doubt they would arrive. A man in a road-stained coat and a wide brim hat stopped his horse in front of the shack. A heavy leather satchel lay across his back, and in his hand he carried an envelope sealed with dark red wax. "You Elias Crow?" "Yes. I carry a letter from Verity Sinclair. She said it must be delivered to you, in person." At the mention of that name, Elias froze for half a heartbeat, as if the wind had changed direction. The rider dismounted, brushed dust off his coat, and handed over the envelope. The wax seal bore a clean, sharp S. The kind of mark made by a woman who had fought a sandstorm with nothing but her body and her will. Elias sat on the wooden step, his hands still smudged with oil, turning the envelope in the afternoon light. June sat beside him, eyes wide. "Dad, is that from her? The big lady from the pass?" "Maybe." Dust skimmed across the ground, carried by a cool wind. Elias broke the wax and opened the letter. The paper smelled faintly of mint and candle smoke. The handwriting was rounded, steady, not decorative, but undeniably strong, just like its author. Elias Crow. I still remember that day, when sand buried everything and yet your hand pulled me back to life. I have not repaid you, and perhaps a debt like that should never be paid with money. But today, I need something greater than gratitude. I need someone I trust. Harlan Pike, my manager, may be betraying me. I have no proof, only instinct. I have learned that instinct is clearest in people who have looked death in the face without flinching. I believe you are one of them. I invite you to Silver Ridge, not for wages. I need you to witness the truth. Watch. Listen. If I am wrong, tell me. If I am right, stay and help me fix what is breaking. Housing will be provided. The little girl will study in the library, quiet and full of books beyond imagination. I do not need your gratitude. I need eyes that will not lie. If you agree, the messenger will wait until sundown. Verity Sinclair. Elias finished reading and sat in silence for a long moment. His eyes stayed on the neat lines of ink, but his mind was seeing a woman standing against a sandstorm, the wind circling her as if unsure whether to touch her. June tugged softly at his sleeve. "Does she need you, Dad?" "Looks like it." "Are you going?" "I don't know yet." She placed her small hand over his, solemn as an old soul. "No one ever asks you for anything. You should go." Elias looked at her, then at the envelope. The wind shifted, dust swirled, the heat softened into something almost gentle. He folded the letter, tucked it into his saddlebag, and stood. "Tell the rider to wait. I have my answer." The messenger narrowed his eyes. "You're agreeing?" "I'm going. Not for money, and not for a promise." "Then why?" "Because the wind remembers the way." When the sun touched the ridge, Elias and June rode out of Coyote Gulch. The little girl sat ahead of him on the saddle, hair wild in the wind, laughing. Elias did not laugh, but in his eyes was a quiet spark, the spark of a man chasing the truth, knowing it might cost him the little piece he has left. The road to Silver Ridge was longer than Elias expected. His horse was sore-kneed, dust clinging thick along its mane, and June kept dozing off in the saddle, her head pressed against his back. They traveled for 3 days straight, crossing dry valleys, burnt grasslands, and a stream so shallow that only stones scraped against one another to prove it ever existed. On the 4th afternoon, the Silver Ridge Range rose like a sheet of hammered metal against the horizon. As they drew closer, Elias heard clanging iron, the sound of hundreds of cattle, men shouting, and wagon wheels grinding over hard red dirt. Verity Sinclair's ranch wasn't simply a place of business. It was a small city carved into the frontier. Barns, bunkhouses, a massive cook shed, blacksmith stations, and wagon bays lined the yard in clean, purposeful rows. At the center stood the main house, a limestone estate with a green roof, tall and unmistakable beneath the lowering sun. Elias swung off his horse and lifted June down. She stared, dizzy with awe. Cattle moved like waves, ranch hands in brown canvas shirts rushed back and forth, and the air smelled of leather, iron, and wood smoke. "Dad," June whispered, "this place is as big as the whole desert." "The bigger a place is," Elias murmured, eyes locked on the stone house, "the easier it is to get lost in it." A man approached, tall, crisp white shirt, black tie, not a speck of dust on him. Harlan Pike. His smile was thin. His eyes slid over Elias, then paused on June, a look Elias disliked immediately. "Welcome to Silver Ridge. I'm Pike, Mrs. Sinclair's manager. She's in a meeting, but I'll handle your accommodations." "She invited me," Elias replied, voice steady. "I'll wait to speak with her myself." Harlan's smile didn't change, but his eyes hardened. "As you wish." He turned and walked away, shoes polished enough to throw sunlight back in Elias's face. His posture was too stiff, like a man afraid someone might stab him from behind. The door of the main house opened, and Verity Sinclair stepped out. She was no longer the woman clinging to a rope in the middle of a sandstorm. She was the master of the place, heavy coat fastened with silver clasps, hair pinned high. Her body was still full and solid, but her stride had weight to it, as if every step declared that this land answered to her. Elias removed his hat. June bowed her head. "I knew you'd come," Verity said, voice low and warm. "I came because of the letter. You said you wanted me to witness the truth." "That's right. And the truth at Silver Ridge is no longer standing upright." She led them into her office, maps of shipping routes along the far wall, ledgers and tax papers, and on the desk, a torn manifest book. The room smelled of ink, wood smoke, and work. Verity sat slowly, voice dropping. "I've lost 3 freight wagons in 2 months. Each time, it was reported as an accident. Yet somehow, only the most valuable shipments are the ones that disappear. And the person who reports the accidents is always Pike." Elias leaned against the wall, arms folded. "What do you need from me?" "Eyes," she said. "Not a detective, a man who doesn't bow. I don't solve crimes. You don't have to. Just live here. Do your work. Let people think you're just a horseman. If something feels off, tell me." Elias didn't respond. Outside the window, wind ran across the grass, carrying the metallic smell of the corrals and the dry tang of coal smoke. "I'll arrange a place for you in June," Verity added. "She can stay in the library with the tutor. There are hundreds of books, old but alive." At the word library, June lit up. "Do you have picture books?" Verity chuckled, throat rough. "We do, and if not, we'll find some." Elias watched them, the child smiling, the woman trying not to show how much that smile mattered. In the golden light of that office, Verity Sinclair didn't look like a powerful ranch owner. She looked like someone who owed a debt she didn't know how to speak aloud. Just before they left the room, Elias asked, "You're sure I won't end up in trouble?" "No," Verity answered, looking out the window. "I just want, if a storm hits again, someone here knows how to pull the right rope." Her voice caught at the end, as if the sentence held more than she was allowed to say. Outside, Harlan Pike watched Elias lead the horse toward the barn. His smile thinned into something sharp. "Women and the wind," he muttered. "Both change direction fast, and men like Crow, sometimes they're just thorns to be removed." From the balcony above, Verity watched both men, one silent, one scheming. Her hand tightened on the railing. She knew the sandstorm wasn't over. It had simply changed shape. That night, in the room Verity arranged for them, June slept near the window, moonlight falling across her face. Elias sat at a small table reading the letter again. "Witness the truth." Those 4 words felt like a new rope waiting to be pulled tight. He whispered, barely louder than the wind outside, "If the truth weighs as much as the woman who wrote this, I'll need both hands to lift it." 2 days later, Elias Crow blended into the rhythm of Silver Ridge like an old stone fitted into a larger wall. He worked the main stables, brushing coats, hammering shoes, checking harnesses. His hands already knew the burn of hot iron and the heavy smell of horse sweat, a scent only those who lived on the edge of the frontier ever learned to call familiar. Verity Sinclair never interfered. She simply watched from a distance, chin slightly lifted, sometimes giving the smallest nod. In her heavy riding coat and wide leather belt, she still had that full, commanding presence. But her steps were steady, grounded, almost as if the earth adjusted to her weight, not the other way around. Harlan Pike was different. He moved like a shadow, whispered to workers, paused in the stable doorway just long enough for Elias to feel those thin, cold eyes on him. His smile stayed the same narrow cut on his face, but something behind it had gone hard. One morning, Elias was repairing a broken wagon wheel when June ran up, holding a drawing. "Dad, look." Her charcoal sketch showed a freight wagon missing a spoke on the right wheel. Below it, she had scribbled a small mark. Elias frowned. "Where did you see this?" "Behind the stables. There was a wheel leaning against the wall. Someone drew an X on it with white chalk. I didn't want to touch it, so I drew it instead." He didn't answer. He stood, wiped his hands on his apron, and walked toward the back of the yard. There it was, leaning in the shadows, one wheel with a clean, precise spoke broken. Chalk mark. New axle grease. A faint trace of sealing wax. Someone had swapped the wheel and left a secret marker behind. Elias crouched and touched the brake. Clean cut, a thin blade, someone with skilled hands. That night, Elias stopped by the cook shed. Sister Abigail had arrived at Silver Ridge to help with meals. She was older, hair silvered, but her eyes were still sharp. He told her what he found. She nodded. I heard a confession from a dockhand. He said someone paid him in gold to look the other way. The man who paid wore gloves, spoke politely, and smelled like expensive cologne. Elias stared out the door, toward the yard where Pike had just passed. Cinnamon and pine? He asked quietly. She nodded. The next day, Elias watched Pike more closely. He noticed something. Every night before a shipment left, Pike ordered one wheel changed, always on the middle wagon. His excuse was always the same: cracked spokes. The workers didn't ask questions. Elias didn't ask either. He simply pocketed a lump of charcoal. That night, he crushed it with cold ash and brushed a thin layer over a spoke on the wagon already marked with chalk. If someone swapped the wheel overnight, the charcoal trace would vanish. If the charcoal stayed, the wheel never moved. Silver Ridge was silent that night. No wind, no voices, just distant horse breaths and the soft creak of leather. Elias waited in the dark outside the stables. Verity appeared without warning, lantern in hand. You're not sleeping, she said. I'm listening to the wind. What does it say? That someone here is afraid of the light. Verity let out a low laugh. Pike told me you're too curious for your own good. He's right. She set the lantern down. In its glow, her shadow stretched long across the wall, wide-shouldered, unshakable. Mr. Crow, are you afraid of getting pulled into my mess? No, I'm afraid for you, standing in a storm without knowing which direction it's coming from. For a moment, Verity didn't speak. Her eyes caught the lantern flame. You would have been born for a different time, she murmured. I go where the wind blows. They stood quietly. A horse snorted inside the stable, and far off, faintly, wagon wheels began to move. The next morning, news spread. Another wagon went missing at the bend in the ridge road. Same wagon position, same excuse. But this time, Elias had marked it. He rode out to the ridge with Verity and a few hands. In the sand, wheel tracks curved sharply, then stopped. A broken wheel lay abandoned at the roadside. Elias crouched, lifted it, and turned it so Verity could see. The charcoal mark was still there. It wasn't cracked, he said. Somebody swapped it intentionally. The chalk mark was a diversion. And the freight? Verity asked, voice rough. Taken, with help from inside. Her breathing got heavy, her cheeks flushing beneath the heat and anger. If I say Pike is the one, would you believe me? I believe proof, not people. Verity's eyes sharpened. Then help me get proof. Elias slid the wheel into his saddlebag. Tomorrow night, I'll lace the wheel spokes with powder. If it disappears, we'll know exactly who touched it. Back at the ranch, Harlan Pike stood on the porch, hands in his pockets, that thin smile still glued to his lips. Nice ride? He asked casually. Lovely, Verity replied. The wind brought good news. As she walked away, Pike's smile twitched into something darker. "Wind carries dust," he murmured. "Dust gets in people's eyes." That night, Elias mixed charcoal powder again. June helped, tiny hands careful as she dusted the wheels. "Dad," she whispered, "why do we have to do it in secret?" "Because sometimes the truth only shows itself in the dark. But the dark is scary. Not as scary as someone who lives in it and doesn't know they're blind." June nodded, steady, brushing charcoal like it was her own quiet prayer. Outside, the wind rose. Sand lifted off the ground. And somewhere in that restless sound was the quiet grinding of wagon wheels and the echo of something on the verge of breaking. That night, Silver Ridge held its breath. There was no moon, only heavy strips of gray cloud pressing low over the land. Fine sand slid along the walls and window frames, whispering like ghosts against the wood. Elias Crow waited in the shadows of the horse barn, coat pulled tight, eyes steady. In front of him, a freight train of 6 wagons stood ready, canvas tied down, 2 horses for each wagon. Harlan Pike stood at the front with a lantern in hand, his shadow stretching long and uneven like a crack in dry earth. From the porch of the main house, Verity Sinclair stepped into the light. Her broad frame stood tall and unmoving, like bedrock planted in the middle of a storm. She didn't speak. She just met Elias's eyes. He nodded once. When Pike turned away, Elias slipped beneath one of the wagons, fingers tracing each spoke. The charcoal powder he had brushed on the spokes the night before was gone from 2 of the center wagons. His jaw tightened. A plan was already in motion. He tied a short leather strap around a single horseshoe bolt on the swapped wheel, leaving a mark only he would recognize when lantern light hit it. Pike signaled. The wagons rolled forward, metal grinding, hooves striking dry dirt. Elias waited a few breaths, then turned to Verity. "They're gone. 2 center wheels were switched. I'm following." "No," Verity said. Her voice was low, rough, but her eyes burned like a torch. "I'm coming. If the truth is finally crawling into daylight, I want to see its face." Elias knew better than to argue. He looked back toward the house. "June stays with Sister Abigail. If the wind changes, lock the doors." June nodded, clutching her drawing book to her chest. They mounted 2 black horses and followed the fading lantern glow ahead of them. Raven Switch Pass was pitch black. The air smelled like cold iron. Sand began to lift off the ground. Another storm was forming. Verity tightened the scarf across her face. "This sand isn't natural. Someone stirred up trouble." Elias looked at her. Sweat glistened across her brow, but she sat straight in the saddle, grip strong, legs braced, solid as a boulder refusing to move. He thought, quietly, that woman was born to stand against storms. When the wagons finally stopped at a curve in the ridge, Elias motioned for silence. They slipped behind a large rock and watched. 5 road bandits waited in the dark. Faces wrapped, pistols drawn. Pike dismounted, shook hands with the leader. In the lantern light, his smile appeared, sharp, thin, metallic. 3 center wagons, Pike said. Easy to unload. Tomorrow we report a spooked team, same payment as before. The bandit laughed. Your boss really has no idea. She's blinded by loyalty, Pike said. Loyalty is like a rein. Once you cut it, it never holds again. Verity's hand tightened on Elias's shoulder. Her face flushed red with anger. I'm going out there. Not yet, Elias whispered. Let him condemn himself fully. Just then, the wind shifted. Their horses caught a blast of sand and snorted loudly. Pike stiffened and spun around. "Who's there?" he barked, gun raised. Elias stepped out from the shadows. Calm, unarmed. Just someone who doesn't like cut reins. Verity stepped out behind him, her coat flaring in the wind, her voice deep and steady. "Pike, I trusted you." He froze, then let out a cold laugh. "And that trust is the reason you couldn't see." He raised his gun at Elias. Elias didn't draw. He didn't flinch. "A gun won't save a liar," he said quietly. The wind struck like a blade. Sand exploded into the air. The lantern blew out. Gunfire cracked through the dark. Elias lunged, smashing his forearm into Pike's wrist. The shot went wild, tearing through Verity's coat. A bandit lifted his gun, but Verity grabbed the nearest lantern and swung it. Oil splashed, flame caught cloth, and the man shrieked as fire raced up his sleeve. Chaos erupted. Horses reared, shouting, sand, fire. Elias tore Pike's gun away, jammed the barrel into the man's chest. "I don't kill men, but the wind might finish what it started." Pike spat at him. "You have no proof." Elias dropped an object onto the ground between them. A wagon wheel, the same one he'd marked with charcoal. "Proof enough?" Verity stepped closer. Sweat streaked through the dust on her face. Her voice cracked with fury. "And we heard you. Every word." The storm swallowed the ridge. The workers from Silver Ridge came rushing when June pulled the alarm bell back at the ranch. Torchlights appeared on the trail. Pike was dragged away in rope and silence. As they let him off, Pike turned to Elias. "She will chew you up, Crow. People like Sinclair only need you when you're useful." Elias didn't answer, but Verity heard every word. She stood just outside the fire glow, wind whipping around her, big-framed and unmoving. A figure carved out of grit, not privilege. When the storm finally fell quiet, Elias faced her. "You all right?" "I used to think I was strong. Tonight I learned I was just lucky." "You're strong," he said. "No. I stood only because someone else held the rope." They looked at each other for a long time, long enough that even the wind grew still. At the edge of the ridge, the first pale streak of dawn broke free. Verity looked at the black smudge of charcoal still on her palm. "The truth stands upright again," Elias nodded. "But it needs someone to hold it steady, every day." And both of them understood. The sandstorm was only the beginning. The real fight had just begun. 3 days after the second storm, Silver Ridge looked as if it had just woken from a fever dream. Sand still clung to every crack in the walls, but the smoke was gone, and the screaming had faded. Only the wind moved now, flowing steadily through the pines, brushing the old bell by the main gate. It was the same bell June had pulled in the storm, waking the entire ranch. Harlan Pike was taken away that morning, head down, hands bound, shirt torn. When he crossed the yard, nobody spoke. Only Verity Sinclair stood at the top of the steps, a broad figure wrapped in a dark shawl, face weathered by sun and sleepless nights. She didn't curse him, didn't shout. She simply said, "I trusted you, Pike, and that is the one thing I cannot forgive." He lifted his head, gave a brittle laugh, eyes dull as cooled ash. "Trust is a luxury, ma'am. Poor folks cling to it so they can still pretend they're human." Verity didn't answer. She raised her hand. 2 ranch hands led him toward the pass, the same road that had swallowed 3 stolen wagons and part of Silver Ridge's dignity. Once Pike's silhouette vanished over the ridge, Elias Crow finally stepped out of the horse barn. He had been there all night, patching reins, clearing burnt canvas, thinking about what he had witnessed. The price of trust. Verity walked toward him. Dust covered her coat, but her stride was steady, shoulders squared, eyes clear as a lake after rain. "Thank you, Elias. If not for you, I would never have seen the cracks inside my own foundation. I only did what had to be done," he said. "No, you did what was right. There is a difference." She handed him an envelope. Thick, heavy. "This is payment, and if you want it, there is also a permanent position here. I need someone to rebuild the freight operations. From now on, every ledger passes through you." Elias looked at the envelope, then at her. "You want me to be your bookkeeper?" "No. I want you to be the spine that keeps Silver Ridge standing straight." He gave a faint smile. "You know I'm not built for paperwork." "Then let someone else write. All you have to do is speak when something bends." A soft breeze lifted the corner of her shawl, revealing a narrow scar along her neck where the bullet grazed her the night of the storm. Elias noticed, but said nothing. Verity caught the glance and gave a tired smile. "It hurts, but it reminds me I still bleed." "You planning to forgive him?" "I handed him to the law. Whatever comes next is between him and the sky." The words sounded weary, but honest. Elias had never heard her sound so unguarded. Up on the hill, June sat with a small group of ranch children, showing them how to sketch. She was covered in sunlight, hair bright, hands smudged with charcoal. She held up a simple drawing and said, "My dad says if truth is supposed to be a straight line, your hand better shake a little. Otherwise, people won't believe it's real." Verity stopped walking. She watched the girl for a long moment. A quiet smile formed, soft as dusk. That afternoon, Elias packed his belongings. He didn't announce it. He hung his farrier's hammer on the hook, folded his saddle blanket, and led his horse from the barn. Verity was waiting on the porch. "You are really leaving?" "Silver Ridge has someone holding the rope now." "And the wind?" "The wind always travels, but it knows the way back when there is a reason." Verity stepped down one step, breath heavy but eyes warm. "Then let me be that reason, Elias Crow." He froze. "You don't need me." "I don't need, I want, and wanting is far more terrifying." Silence gathered like dust between them. The wind swept her hair loose, carrying the faint scent of mint from her scarf. Warm, familiar. "I never stay anywhere long," Elias said. "Then go. But if the wind ever shifts, Silver Ridge will not lock the door." He held her gaze for a long moment. Then he nodded, touched his hat, and turned away. When he was gone, Verity walked the long hallway of the house. She stopped in front of an old mirror. In the reflection, a broad woman stared back. Strong, weathered. But in her eyes now was something else. Calm. She whispered to herself, "Salvation does not come from pity. It comes from having the courage to return what is right with clean hands." She blew out the lantern. Darkness filled the room, but outside the first harvest moon rose over Silver Ridge, lighting the ranch with soft gold, a place where truth had been chosen, and held not by law, but by the hearts of those who stood straight. Far away, along a dusty road washed in moonlight, Elias and June rode toward the horizon. June looked up. "Dad, do you think she's sad?" "Yes, but someone who stands upright does not fall." "Will we ever go back?" "When the wind calls for it." June nodded, pulled out her paper, and drew a little figure, a large woman standing between sand and wind, with a silver ridge behind her. Elias glanced at it and smiled. "You draw well, June. I just draw whatever the wind remembers." And just like that, the second storm passed. No fireworks, no grand reward, only a quiet peace restored by human hands, a peace with conditions. You must keep your back straight, even when the wind changes. If you believe kindness still has a place in the windswept West and in the hearts of people, leave a comment below. Because maybe that's how the truth keeps getting chosen.